There we go. Well, good morning. It is still morning. It's 11 o'clock, even though we are starting our class earlier or later. I'm sorry. We're starting our class an hour later than we did in the first few days. That's just because I was getting up before the chickens were. It didn't make any sense to me. So I can choose to start my class at 8 o'clock. And that's what I did. So we're starting classes at 8 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock, which means we are meeting here at 11 o'clock to 12:30. So running into our lunch hour a little bit with our, what class are we in? Critical thinking class. Let's get to it, shall we? We have got a new topic for conversation that we're going to be going into now. So all of this is about finding out who you are, right? No, that would be the other class. The Bookless classroom is all about finding out who you are. Woo! I had a lot to do during this break that I had. Probably should have gone the other way around. We were talking about American history in our Bookless classroom, and about how, and this is really actually good for us for this critical thinking class, because so much of what we know and who we are all comes from our perspective. And I'm learning so much about what people are basically learning or hearing what I teach and hearing what I say based on perspective. Some people can see, let me just give you a really real life example. Because I've been going through a lot, and I lost my husband 2 years ago this April. A lot of people have been noticing my sadness because I will get sad. Of course, I'm going to get sad. Um, and really interpreting that through their own eyes, like, oh, she must be falling apart, she must be depressed, she must not be thinking clearly. And I have a lot of evidence that I certainly have been sad, absolutely sad. I mean, I was tearful here talking about him in our spiritual connection class. So it certainly makes me sad that I don't have my best friend here anymore. That makes me very sad. But I noticed how people interpret that as being, an inability to function. And sadness simply isn't an inability to function. Sadness is a real life feeling that we have, and it is the result of an event. And very often we can't change that. Very often sadness comes out of an event where we have a loss, and then there's nothing that we can do about it, right? Well, if that was enough to overtake me, to overcome me, right? To take me out, well, then any event that makes me sad is enough to bring us down, right? Any one of us down. So much of our approach to life, our ability to cope, to find joy in things, as opposed to succumbing to negative feelings and depression, that has so much to do with perspective. And so that's what I'm helping you do here, is to try and get a perspective, critically think through your own perspective, critically think through what is truth, right? What is reality? The reality is I don't have my husband, right? That's the reality of what is going on. But there's a lot of other realities. That's not the only reality, right? That's not the only reality. I have my kids. That's a reality. They're adults, but I have them, right? So, and I have this beautiful home. That's a reality too. So much of what we see, and I've noticed many people have been, you know, Oh, are you sad? Oh, are you sad? Oh, are you sad? As if they're crossing their fingers hoping that I go down. And we can have people like that in our lives. We absolutely can have people like that in our lives that really are crossing their fingers hoping that they can feel superior by bringing you down, right? But that's just a perspective. That's only a perspective. And when we critically think through our own perspectives that we have, our own beliefs, we can fine tune those beliefs to be resourceful, to help us, to not be a uh, to not be an event that takes us out, to not succumb to the sadness or anxiety, but to really begin to know, you know, who you are, what makes you sad, what makes you happy, what makes you, gleeful, what makes you embarrassed, what makes you ashamed, tenacious, diligent, wise, courageous. Those are the things that you hone in on so that you make sure that whatever perspective you're taking, it is a constructive one. Because we have enough people around us that are willing to provide their destructive perspectives. Are you sad? Are you sure? You seem sad. You need to go to the hospital because you seem kind of sad. No, I'm sad about you. I'm sad about your perspective on life. I'm sad about the fact that you can't have events in your life and understand the great meaning that they have for you, as my husband's death should. Otherwise, it's in vain, right? Otherwise, it's in vain. And so his death should have great meaning for me beyond simple sadness, right? Beyond the simple feeling of sadness. Dear gosh, he was 60 when he died. I was with him since I was 20, since I was 19. I certainly hope that my thoughts and memories of my husband are well beyond just feelings of sad. Because really, there's nothing constructive out of just feeling that, right? There's nothing constructive out of it that will take us down. And as you know, if you know me, that I wouldn't let it take me out. I would build on it. I would make it into something that was worthy of his life, worthy of him. That's what I would do. And that's how we think of events. That's the perspective that we need to have. I say it all the time, use a scripture quote. I turn all things for good, and all things are for the good, work out for the good for all those who love and are called to his plan. So his life would be in vain if what I did was what many of these people hope that a woman does, that they fall apart, that they are hysterical, that they're emotional, all those words that people use when a woman feels like a woman: nurturing, loving, emotional, sad. All of those things are wonderful things about me. They are wonderful things about me. And there isn't anybody who has the power at all to turn those into something that's destructive. Nobody has the power to do that to me at all, to turn those things into something constructive. I do. I have that power. Some people wish that they had that power, but they do not have that power. So I wish that you would stop it with the power, Sheriff's Department. I wish that you would stop it with the power that you think that you have to proclaim that I'm depressed or sad, because first of all, you're not a professional in any way, shape, or form. Okay, so we're moving on into our critical thinking classroom. So the perspective was for our bookless classroom, actually, and we're learning a lot in our bookless classroom about who we are, and that has everything to do with perspective. So even though our bookless classroom, I'm trying to use language that is for middle school people, I am really utilizing concepts from critical thinking here and more adult-like concepts to help them understand. And it's I think it's going well. In my mind, it's going well. Anyway, but we're in the critical thinking classroom. And so we're going to finish up talking about our helping behavior. I think I have one more slide on the helping behavior. And then what we want to do is we want to kind of evaluate that from Bloom's taxonomy, which we haven't done. So let's go and do that. So we know Bloom's taxonomy. I still have all of the slides up here for you. So we talked about the empathy altruistic hypothesis. The greater empathy we have, the more likely we are to help others, to become altruistic, right? We talked about the differences in individuals, in gender, in culture that motivates us to help. And then we left off with the bystander intervention decision tree, right? And so I think this decision tree might not be a bad place to start when we are talking about looking at, I want us to look at that next slide. When we're talking about looking at Bloom's taxonomy, right? So if we're looking at Bloom's taxonomy, how does this decision tree help us have learned using Bloom's taxonomy? How did we learn this decision tree better? Okay, well, the very first thing in Bloom's taxonomy is memory, right? So first of all, we're using memory very first of all, but that's our very basic step of Bloom's taxonomy. And so how are we using memory when we first see an emergency event? Well, remember, this is dynamic. All of this, Bloom's taxonomy is dynamic, and this decision-making tree, even though it's shown in a hierarchy and has more of a hierarchy kind of or a stage-like form, it is dynamic. So where are we using memory? From Bloom's first taxonomy, recall, where are we using memory in this decision-making tree? Well, we are deciding if it's an emergency. So we're comparing and contrasting, right, with emergency situations. I'm going to pull out the critical thinking book here, so I make sure that I get all of my stages right. So when we are in our recall, what we're trying to do is also understand, right? So in the recall, we're recalling similar situations. And in our recall, we are doing the very first taxonomy, which is trying to understand. So we observe and describe, basically, right? So it's an event. The person is sitting there on the floor. They're not saying anything. It's an airport. I normally don't see people sitting in an airport on the floor like that. We're recalling and doing comparisons and contrasts and contrasts. And that contrast that we're doing is part of analysis. Our comparing is part of understanding, because we're saying we are determining, what do we already know? What do we already know? Now, just for a minute here, I'm going to stop and say, why are we, oh my gosh, we're on day 5 and we're still talking about Bloom's taxonomy. Every single thing that you are learning at all, the purpose of this critical thinking class is that you are trying to implement and determine, am I implementing these steps so that I do have a better understanding of what's going on? That's the purpose of all of this, right? We are supposed to, if these are the steps that I need to take in order to not only learn something, but in order to eventually create something because of what I've learned, oh, right, isn't that stimulating? Isn't that motivating? The idea that the steps I'm going through can help me learn something and then create something, I find that to be extremely motivating to me. Okay, and so we are analyzing while we are trying to understand, right? So this comparing and this contrasting that we're doing, comparing and understanding, contrasting that we're doing in the analysis. So we're going through each one of these so carefully so you can begin to naturally assess, oh, this part I'm analyzing because I'm contrasting. This part I am understanding because I'm finding the similarities. That helps me understand things better, right? And this stage I'm applying because I have physically begun to teach this course. So I'm applying these things, right? Or I've done some mental exercise in my head where I have worked through the process. There's a mental problem that we give individuals in cognitive psychology class, and the mental problem is you've got you've got a box of tacks, you have some matches, and you have a candle. And what you need to do is you need to be able to have that candle be lit and standing on its own with those tools. And the problem here is, I'm going to see if I can find that picture because I know I can. And the problem here is that we have got a perspective of those objects. And as we see those objects, the way that they exist there, we are not capable of having a perspective, or it's very difficult for us to have a perspective of those objects as being useful in other ways. So, what are the objects that we have again? We've got a candle, we've got a box of tacks, and we have some matches. And so, and it's called, okay, I'm going to get this over to you guys, believe it or not, I am. Just give me just a second here. It's a candle box problem, I think it is. All right. All right. Here it is. So there you've got the problem. So what you've got there in that picture, if you can see it pretty well, I'll blow it up for you. There's the problem. And you can see that this is a candle box problem from 1945, a study that was to see how people solve their problems. And the big deal here with solving problems is that it takes perspective, is what we're saying. It takes perspective. to change our ability to solve this problem. Let's take a look at the outcome over here. So we've got the boxes are empty versus the boxes as containers. Okay, so what they did, I see we've got a box of matches is what it is, and then thumbtacks over here, all right? And I got to get the solution to the problem up there too. Okay. All right, so we've got the problem over there, and the difference here is sorry about that for the little lengthy finding of these things. The difference is am I presenting the information there as it's pictured here, matches in a box, candles laying there, and tacks, or am I presenting the boxes as containers? So is the box of matches empty, or is the box of matches as they are a container containing the matches is what they're saying there. All right. I'm not making this as clear as I can for you, but it is a good problem over here. So what we have here is the likelihood that somebody is going to solve the problem. And we can see that in the green bar, we have individuals who are solving that problem approximately 80% of the time, compared to people in the orange bar who are solving the problem approximately 45% of the time. Significant difference between the two. What was the difference in their ability to solve this problem? They were told, how can you get a lighted candle standing up using these things? Okay, light the candle, and it basically has to be standing up using those tools. And what was the solution? The solution is here. That's what they were presented with when the boxes were as they are supposed to be, as containers. But when they weren't, individuals were able to solve the problem, and this is how you solve the problem. You took the tacks, you emptied the box of matches, you tacked up the box onto the wall, whatever, and then you lit the candle with the match, and that's how you solved the problem. Here it says, what's the problem? The problem is that people tend to fixate or focus on characteristics of the problem as opposed to the objects that they have available for their solution. What does this all mean? It means I need to take a certain perspective in order to solve a problem. And sometimes changing or switching my perspective completely helps me solve that problem. But often I can't do that on my own. Often what we needed for my students to be able to do that is we needed to tell them, think about those objects outside of the box. Present to them in the study the objects in their containers and outside of their containers, in order for people to begin to practice looking at things outside the box. That's exactly what these problems are, helping people think about things outside the box. Here's another problem. It's called the two-string problem. Yeah, I'm looking at this. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be looking at this like this. This was another problem in 1931 where they had a chair and pliers is what they did. And How many people did they get to solve this problem? All right, just give me a second here, and we've got a new one. So you have to be able here to grab you have to, it's a two-string problem, tied together the two strings hanging from the ceiling. However, you cannot reach both of them. In the room there, what do you have? You have a chair and you have pliers. But even with the chair, you cannot grab both of those ropes. How can you tie these things together? How can you tie these two strings together? So it's a two-string problem is what it's called. 60% of individuals did not solve the problem after 10 minutes. However, if as part of the study, individuals set the string in motion, individuals 23 out of 27 then learned to tie the pliers to the one string, swing it over, and then grab it in order to get it swinging, and then grab it in order to tie it to the other one. But what did they need? They needed a change in perspective is what they needed in order to solve that problem. And often they needed it to come from outside of themselves. So if they accidentally, or if a Confederate got the string, they saw the Confederate getting the string moving, then these individuals had a change in perspective and they were able to get those two strings tied together. So, critically thinking through these stages. How am I understanding? How am I comparing? How am I analyzing and contrasting? Am I evaluating is going through then these taxonomies and saying, did I do all of these things? The more and more we do these things, the more and more we are able on our own to change perspectives. We call it a paradigm shift is what we do, and then solve our problems. If somebody is feeding you all the time, as we see in our media, oh, you're depressed. Oh, you're anxious. Oh, Gen Z can't do anything. Oh, look at their problems that they have. If this is all you see, that is what going to be your perspective. We talked about this in the Bookless classroom as well when we were talking about these causes of death. So what we have here is we have got, so this is a really good thing for us to take a look at now too, when we're taking a look at the idea here of changing perspectives. We have got in the first column, the actual causes of death. In the second column, I'm going to go through this a little bit more quickly because I did this in the Bookless classroom and you can see a little bit more in-depth explanation about this. The second column is Google searches by individuals, and the third and fourth column, they are media sources and media coverage. So what does the media coverage? And we can see that the media is covering terrorism, homicides, and suicides when those three things are actually causing under 2% of the deaths that we see, with suicides causing 2% and homicides and terrorism causing under 1% of the deaths, and yet significantly more time being spent on those events in the media. So what would that do to our perspective, right? What is it doing to Gen Z perspective when somebody keeps reminding them that they are the generation that is falling short, that won't do as good as their parents did, who are depressed and anxious, and who don't know how to cope? What would that be doing to that Gen Z population? And I'm going to use my example again. People around me for the last year have been having a self-interest and making it seem as if I am not stable. And this is the way, as I've said, that individuals suppress women who are powerful and smart women. They are fearful of them, and they want to they're afraid of them. They're cowards, and so they want to eliminate them. And that's what they've been doing. And one of the ways that they've been doing this has been attacking my mental health. This is one of the reasons why I'm also doing these videos, to demonstrate that despite what your perspective that you are trying to blanket me with, you can't do it. You can't do it because I use Bloom's taxonomy, because I know how to cope, because in all of these years, my go-to isn't anxiety and depression. My go-to is solutions to my problems. But the point here is this, is that people will try and put a perspective on you, right? That's what they've been trying to do. I just had somebody last night when I went out. Oh, you must be so sad and depressed. Oh, really? Really? Maybe I cope. Maybe I cope. And it's not that you don't get sad. It's that you don't turn them into depression. You don't turn the sad events into depression. And part of this is, I'm teaching you because it can be learned. And it can be learned because part of it simply is perspective. It's perspective. They're trying to force a perspective on me that simply doesn't exist. And there's no evidence for it. There's no evidence for it. So we are scientists, and we don't go by, we can study feelings and emotions, but we look at the facts. As scientists, it's our job to look at the facts and not be swayed by all of these really very unscientific, very short-sighted opinions that other people have of you, right? Okay. Now, we did Columbus and we're doing Cortez and rose-colored glasses in our Bookless classroom. Okay. All right. So let's and so that's I've done this now with the decision tree. So we're taking a look at, and I think I've done this enough where you could go through each one of these stages in the decision tree and see where, if this is a stage of analysis, is this a stage of evaluating, is this a stage of understanding, where are we using memory and recall in this, where's our application? Okay, so that's what I would like you to do, is to do some mental application, some mental exercises, and how you are applying Bloom's taxonomy to this decision-making tree. And right now, that's application. So that's already one of Bloom's taxonomies, right? All right, let's move on. Okay, let me get this study in front of my face so I know what I'm talking about exactly. All right, so what we're doing when we're trying to understand a chart that we have here, let's take a look at the word. So we have helping game versus a neutral condition. So half of individuals were in a condition where they were playing a helping game. And then the other one was a neutral condition where they weren't playing any kind of a helping game. So really not stimulating any helping emotions. Remember, what we've been talking about is, we've been talking about whether or not we are motivated to help individuals and what motivates us to help individuals. Okay, so what we have there on the x-axis, which is our horizontal line, we've got pick up pencils, and then we've got individuals who were part of the helping game and individuals who were, I got to see what my legend looks like over here. Individuals who are part of the helping game and individuals who were in the neutral condition. And then we are looking at how often these individuals were willing to help. So the orange bars are those individuals in the neutral condition, and the red bars are those individuals who played the helping game. And then after they did these, so they were online playing games. One was a helping game. The other one was a neutral game where they didn't instigate or motivate any kind of emotions. Okay? A lot of times a neutral condition can be an explanatory video. So how you might be able to put window screens back in your window. I'm looking at window screens. That's my bias. It's what's in my mind's eye, right? Okay, so how you put window screens back on windows. So that could be a neutral condition, right? How they built the Hoover Dam, a neutral condition, although that can stimulate some emotions. And then the dependent variable, what do they care about? They cared about whether or not individuals, they had 3 different outcome conditions. They had an individual dropped pencils. Did you help them pick up the pencils? They were asked if they wanted to volunteer for research without any money. So after their study, they said, could you volunteer for participate in a future study? And it won't pay you any money. And then the last one is where they saw a female experimenter being harassed by her ex-boyfriend who enters the room. So there we can see 3 different conditions. And we are measuring whether or not individuals are helping. So we can also see this we can also call it 3 different perspectives, right? 3 different perspectives that we have there. We've got, because it gives us a different perspective, right? So we've got the perspective of helping behavior and then a neutral condition. What that does is it frames our thinking, is what it does. In psychology, we call that priming. It's priming. If I want you to think about helping somebody, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prime your mind to think about it by giving you helpful thoughts about helping. So that's what the video is. There was another study that was done on whether or not individuals, just for an example, whether or not individuals would help a person who had a flat tire change their tire. And in one of the conditions, they had a person who had a flat tire, and then they were just watching to see how many people would stop and help that individual with the flat tire. But in another condition, they had a scene right before that flat tire with Confederates, helpers of the study, where they saw somebody a mile before helping another person change a flat tire. That's priming. That's priming. I am trying to put something in your mind that will lead to a behavior. Commercials are priming you to be hungry to go eat McDonald's. They're priming you to eat sugary foods. They're priming you to be fearful about the COVID virus. They're priming you in those advertisings to be fearful about terrorism or to be fearful about homicide. All of that primes you to think about something. So in these studies, we are priming you, giving you a perspective of helping. But then we're giving you 3 different conditions as well. Now, remember, it's not the same person who sees somebody drop pencils and who sees somebody who is being harassed by their boyfriend. Each group sees something different, and then we record the amount of people who are willing to help in that group. Okay, so again, we've got somebody drops pencils in the very first condition. And we can see that if I was primed with a helping behavior, that is, I played a helping video game before I saw somebody drop their pencils. In that condition, about 68% of individuals were willing to help if they saw the helping game, if they played the helping game, as opposed to about 32% of individuals helped that person pick up pencils if they saw only the neutral video. In the second condition, they asked, would you be willing to volunteer for some future research? About 100% of the individuals that played the helping game said that they would be willing to participate in future research, compared to the other group in the neutral condition that played a neutral game. About 69% of those individuals helped. And in the last condition, now isn't this interesting? Because it's the condition that likely needs the most help. And we see the least help in this, right? Now, why would that be? Let's think critically about this, right? Why would it be that we see the least amount of help in the situation where we clearly need the most help? The woman who is the researcher whose ex-boyfriend comes in. Why wouldn't we help? Well, let's go back to the decision-making tree. When somebody drops pencils, first of all, it's not really an emergency. I don't have to have special skills to help somebody pick up their pencils, right? So it doesn't take a lot of cognitive resources to figure out the need in that situation. I probably have to think a little bit more about whether or not I'm available for future research. But I have a very positive attitude about being available for future research if I just played a helping game. And this is interesting because it also borders on some other studies about how we are much more willing to help in the distant future than tomorrow, right? If they would have asked them, will you help in a future research tomorrow? They probably would not have had 100% because people would have had to think about their schedules and plans. The distant future, nothing's going on in the distant future. Yeah, I'll do it. So more perspective going on there, right? So why didn't they help in the last condition? Well, volunteering for research, again, brings on a different perspective, but if I'm in a good mood, I am much more likely to do something favorable if it's in the distant future, okay? Because I don't have a schedule going on. I can't think of all the things that might complicate my volunteering in the distant future. But that last one, where the female researcher's ex-boyfriend comes in and harasses her, and we have the least amount of help from both groups in that area. Why? Well, if we look at the decision-making tree here, it's because we have to weigh a lot more things. A lot more cognitive processing is going on. And we know that when we are processing things cognitively, that takes time. It takes time. We cannot process things immediately. It literally takes time for us to think through a thought. Thoughts don't happen just like that. We can have insight. It's not that they can't happen like that. But when we are problem solving, that takes time. Why did less people help? Because there was a lot of thinking that had to go on. There was analysis, there was comparing, there was contrasting that was going on, right? There was probably memory and some application, some mental unfolding of what happens in this situation based on your prior experiences, right? So interesting when people are willing to be motivated to help there and when they aren't. So much of this is often based on perspective, but if we have a life that is primed with helping behaviors, that is, Your parents taught you to volunteer. The schools taught you to volunteer and that it was important. You were taught to go out of your way to help one another. You learned the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. Now you are primed for helping behavior. And you, because you've been primed in so many ways, are much more likely to help. If instead you have been primed to be fearful and stay isolated and stay away from people and fear that they might have disease and look at people who are different than you as being different than you, then you are not priming helping behaviors, are you? You want your children to be motivated to help? You need to prime those helping behaviors in them. You want to be more motivated to help? Then you have to prime those helping behaviors in your mind. You have to take note of those helping behaviors. You have to notice when somebody else is helping. You have to notice the conditions by which you would be more likely to help. Those are the things that you have to do if you want to be a more helpful person. You have to prime those ideas in your head. Play a helping game. It works. Okay, so what can increase pro-social behavior? Pro-social behavior is helping behavior. So this was my slide that I was using actually to reintroduce Bloom's taxonomy, but we kind of have already done that, right? We've already talked about Bloom's taxonomy and we have done a review of that relative to our theory on helping behavior. So this is a little bit more of a summary that we're doing. An evaluation. A summary would be an evaluation of the material. So another way of using Bloom's taxonomy. All right, so what can increase pro-social? Pro-social is helping behavior is what it is. And it doesn't matter. Pro-social doesn't care whether you're helping out of the goodness of your heart or whether you're helping because it was court ordered. It doesn't matter. This group might be volunteering to be able to get school credit. It doesn't matter why you're helping. Maybe it's forced. Maybe it's because it's court ordered. Maybe it's because it's part of you getting credit for your class. So it's forced again in that way. It's still pro-social. It's still helping behavior. When we say pro-social behavior, we don't distinguish on if it is selfless pro-social behavior or selfish. I want to get credit. Selfish helping behavior is still helping behavior. Okay? So pro-social behavior can be selfish. I can help you because I'm selfish. I care about reducing my distress. I care about reducing my guilt, selfish reasons for helping. Or I can be motivated by the empathy in my heart I can be motivated by your needs over my own needs, and that can promote pro-social behavior, helping behavior. So, as we have said, you need to be aware and knowing and understanding the bystander effect actually increases people's helping behavior. They know, for example, that someone is less likely to help when there is a large group. And if that is the case, somebody's less likely to help, and I know that, then I might be motivated to help somebody more when there's a larger group. So we know that the bystander effect actually is a motivator when we know and have knowledge and understand that bystander effect, that actually does improve our motivation, increase our motivation to help another person. We also, through seeing other people help one another and also then priming and thinking about helping behavior, what that does is it helps us overcome our inhibitions, right? So the more often, think about the helping behavior for helping somebody change a tire. If you don't know how to change a tire, why would you stop and help that person? But what if you saw nobody helping? You knew that all of these people were driving by because there's so many people, they assumed somebody else would help. They're on their way someplace and they cannot be distracted or disturbed, right? But you can. And you know that. And so you see somebody who needs help with their tire change, but you have some knowledge, but you're not sure. Wouldn't you feel inhibited? Wouldn't you feel like I better move on? Somebody has more knowledge than I do. The more that we help, the less inhibited we are about helping. The more we see other people help, the less inhibited. If I saw somebody changing a tire and then 5 minutes later saw somebody who was in need of changing a tire, I might be less inhibited, even though I'm not sure. And I could stop and go, well, I know somebody isn't likely to help you, and I know something. Let's see if we could do this together. Let's see if we can problem solve this, work this out, solve this problem together. You know something, I know something. Now, normally I would never do that. But now that I know things about the bystander effect, I might be less inhibited when it comes to helping somebody, right? I might jump in a little more sooner. And we know that. And we know that people who are aware, who know these things, do overcome their inhibitions and do jump in and help more often. We know also that making volunteering mandatory helps. We have the over justification effect. That's our next lesson. That's what we're going to talk about. So hold on there, hold that thought. We're going to talk about the over justification effect. But the important thing here is this. If I really want somebody to learn about helping behavior, I might have to force it. My older son went to Catholic Central. My younger son went to St. Mary's, and my older son was forced to do volunteering. He wasn't forced to do it at St. Mary's, from what I recall. He didn't have to. My younger son didn't have to do volunteering, but my older son did. So that was an important skill, an important behavior that Catholic Central wanted to teach their students. So they made it mandatory for them to volunteer. By making things mandatory, we are stimulating all of the hormones, all of the neurotransmitters, all of the chemistry in our bodies that are associated with helping. Good feelings. We get good feelings typically when we help somebody else. And so by making it mandatory for our children to volunteer, by making it mandatory for the court systems, for those people who have done something to violate the law, by making it mandatory to volunteer, we are stimulating the ideas and the chemicals in our body that will motivate people to help more often in the future. So making it mandatory is not a bad idea. We're going to see that by making things mandatory doesn't necessarily make it then a heart belief. It doesn't put it in my heart to volunteer, but it can. It can. And we'll talk about the overjustification effect in a minute. And then finally, putting the emphasis on positive psychology. And it's not just I'm a positive psychologist, and so that's my thing. I put emphasis on positive things. But that's all we're saying. You don't have to know positive psychology to emphasize positive psychology. We've been teaching it all along here. I've been teaching it all along. Positive psychology is to not let somebody tell you, oh, you must be depressed. Positive psychology is not letting somebody tell you, oh, you must be anxious. Positive psychology isn't letting somebody tell you, oh, you're Gen Z, you're a failure. That's not positive psychology. Now, it doesn't mean that we deny those things if that's the case, right? We're here for truth. We're not here to deny something if that's the case. If denying it won't fix the problem. The only way to fix the problem is by taking on the problem head on. I would say you got to go through the problem, not around the problem. Around the problem means I deny the problem. So we're not telling you to have this, this pink cloud is what we call it. Sometimes we call it a pink cloud, that you're always on this pink cloud, right? If you want to be on a cloud, why not have a pink cloud besides, right? But that's a fantasy. We don't have pink clouds. Well, sometimes we do, don't we? But no, we don't. Those aren't pink clouds. Those are the reflection of the sun on the clouds. They're still not pink clouds, are they? No, but they look pink. It's a perspective, isn't it? So we can't be unrealistic. That's what we know about positive psychology. In positive psychology, we can't be unrealistic about the things that we are positive about, but we can't also be unrealistic in the negative way, right? We can't be thinking, oh, poor me. Everything always happens to me. Why does this kind of thing always happen to me? And there can be truth to it. There can be some. I was just saying that, and I remember my son saying that he literally broke his tooth. How something more severe didn't happen to him, I don't know. He was behind somebody swinging a bat, and the bat hit and broke his tooth. So somebody with all their might was swinging a bat, and dear Jesus, thank you, Lord, that something worse didn't happen. But the first thing he said, I heard him say, was, why does this, it's going to make me cry. It does. Because when people think, and it's my son, why does this always happen to me? See, I knew I shouldn't have gone down that road telling you that story because it makes me so sad. Because that is where real depression comes from. Real depression comes from thinking, this happens to me all the time. And I'm not crying because I think it happens to me. I'm crying because I'm so sad that my son thought it happened to him. And the idea here is this. The idea is I know that thought can take people down. I know it can take them out. I know when people say to me, oh, you must be so sad. They want me to focus on that. They want people to focus on that. And I know the truth of the matter is that if my son believed that in his heart all the time, and from then on, he would be in a very bad place. And that's why it's so important to me. That's why it's so important to me that we get these perspectives right. It starts with my family, of course. Of course it starts with my family, because that's where I learn to help. And that's where I learned to be empathetic towards others as well, right? So I can be a positive psychologist, and I can cry very easily, and I can easily think about things that would make me cry. You can see I've done it. I didn't even, I knew if I told that story, it would make me sad though. And then I can dwell on those things. But that's not what positive psychology is about. So we emphasize the hopefulness. We emphasize the idea that all things work out for good for those who love. All things work out for the good for those who love. And are you part of his plan? If you are loving, you are constructive. If you are unloving, you are destructive. If you are unloving, you point out time and time again, you must be sad. Are you sad? Do you need to go to the hospital? If you are destructive, that's what you do. If you are constructive, you point to the benefits in being sad, right? The outcomes, the rewards, but also the rewards of being good, and also the rewards of having a beautiful home, having loving parents, having an education, having a school and teachers that desire to give you something and teach you something. That's what we focus on. So when we say that we want to focus on positive psychology, it doesn't mean we put our heads in the clouds. We look at things realistically, and then we choose how to see the positive. Why? Because it gives us hope, is what it does. It makes us connected to other people. It motivates us to want to help. It motivates us to want to connect. That's the reason why. It motivates us to create. Why? Because we are constructive. We're being constructive. Why does learning lead to creation? I just thought of this. I always say, oh, to create. Why? Because we are being constructive. And by the very nature of the word, constructing, we are creating. So when we are positive, when we are helping, we are constructive, and therefore we are creating, right? And what have I said 1,000 times? When we make our women vulnerable, we are destroying them, and we destroy their children, our children. We destroy them. And when we make our women vulnerable, we destroy them. When we make our women vulnerable, we make our children vulnerable, we destroy them. And when we make our women and our children vulnerable, we make our future vulnerable, and we destroy that. When you make your women vulnerable, you destroy them. And then you destroy your children, and then you destroy your future. You around me, this nastiness that's around me, you better be paying attention. Because I'm constructive. And I will construct right over you. I'll construct right over the top of you is what I'll do. Right over the top of you. I will build. Don't think I won't. You know I will. Okay, so we've already done the Bloom's taxonomy. And now what I would like to do is I am going to take a little break and show you a video. This actually might get, I don't know the extent to which my videos end up getting copyrighted. I don't think that this one is copyrighted, but when I play the music and things like that, some of those are copyrighted, which then block my video. And I don't want my video being blocked. It might get blocked, which means it won't be in the live sessions. All right. But I want to show you what this video on what motivates us. And I might take a little bit more of a break after that. So let me get, doesn't matter.
Rewards and punishments guide the lives of most Americans, yet few people understand how these strategies work. What really has a strong impact on our behavior is whether we are motivated to do it and how we are motivated to do it. I'm going to talk about the two types of motivation, intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is natural and comes from within. Extrinsic motivation can be natural or contrived, and it is some sort of external consequence for engaging in a behavior. A natural reinforcement is a typical consequence of behavior in that setting, while a contrived reinforcement has been deliberately arranged to modify behavior and is not naturally in the environment. This video will specifically focus on the overjustification effect, which states that if you start to extrinsically reward a behavior that is already intrinsically rewarding, the intrinsic motivation to perform that behavior decreases. If there is no intrinsic motivation to begin with, however, extrinsic or contrived rewards can build intrinsic motivation. Contrived reinforcers and extrinsic motivation are not only good, but necessary for tasks in which a person needs to build skills and does not have the intrinsic motivation to do so. To illustrate the overjustification effect, I give you the example of Katie and Megan. It was natural for Megan to want to join the track team at school since she loves to run. The coach praises all the team members individually at the end of practice for their hard work and dedication. Over the loudspeaker on Mondays, the principal announces the names of the members of the track team and congratulates them on their achievements from their weekend meet. The team members are also rewarded with snacks and social time after each practice. The team members become popular because of the publicity within the school. Although Megan has always loved to run and was intrinsically motivated to do so before, her intrinsic motivation is decreasing due to all of the extrinsic rewards she is now receiving. Katie joins the team because her mother agrees to buy her a new designer purse she wants if she joins. Katie's mother then promises to buy her a new shirt for each week she attends all track practices. Although Katie is not particularly skilled at running at first, her teammates encourage her not to give up and praise her for her effort at each practice. Katie finds that as each week passes, she feels more fit from running and enjoys the shopping trip even more. Her clothes fit better and her confidence increases. Not only does she feel fit and confident, but she loves the feeling of the dopamine rush she gets from running, something she never experienced in her days as a couch potato. Gradually, all of these rewards build an intrinsic motivation to run in Katie. Although both girls remain on the track team, Megan only does so for the extrinsic contrived rewards she has begun to receive by joining the track team. Eventually, these extrinsic rewards overpower the intrinsic motivation that Megan once had, making her extrinsically motivated. Katie receives extrinsic, contrived rewards at first to motivate her and keep her committed to the team, but she gradually builds intrinsic motivation.
That's how that video ends. She does such a good job. She's just, I think that she's just a student. She actually redid the video, and I'm surprised that she redid the video and that it still stops like that all of a sudden. But good job on that. I think it's Katie or Caitlin. It was her name. Great job on that video. So what this is teaching us is about the over justification effect. So that's what we saw in that last slide, right? So I shouldn't read like this. It's just not very attractive. Mandatory volunteerism. And then we wanted to talk about this over justification effect. Why was mandatory volunteering good to help us relative to this over justification effect? Well, this over justification effect is believing that we are motivated by extrinsic rewards, when the reality is that most of what we do is motivated by intrinsic rewards. Let me give you an example. Let's give you an example of when you are really motivated to do something. Most of the time, we get very motivated when we see injustices or when there's an injustice that occurs to us, okay? All right, so we are really motivated to have justice. That comes from a what's the word that I'm looking for? An attack or something that is an aversion. We have some kind of a aversion, a hurt is the word that I'm looking for, of our personal beliefs of who we are. So when are we often most motivated to do something? We're most motivated when we see an injustice occur, right? We're motivated by other things, right? We're motivated by money. If we run out of money, we're motivated by money. We get motivated when we see our neighbor have a new deck built. We might be motivated to build a deck. Or if we see our neighbor rake their leaves, right, and not have a service, we might be motivated to do that. So we get motivated to do things all the time, right? But our strongest motivations come from inside of ourselves. When we feel ashamed, what happens? We are motivated to do something about that. When we feel guilty, we're motivated to help. We're motivated to change our behavior so that we don't feel those negative feelings again. So we are highly motivated internally to avoid negative feelings. We are motivated to get things. Those are intrinsic motivations. So we have intrinsic motivations and we have extrinsic motivations. Let's hide that for a minute. And let's get some definitions of the two of those things. Okay? Did I not put those here? Okay, so here we have got the definition of the over justification effect so that we know what that means, okay? All right, so the over justification effect is the belief and focus on internal rewards because of external rewards or pressures. I'm loading something else up over here, and that's the reason why I stopped. Okay, so over justification effect, the belief and focus on external rewards as a cause for behaviors versus intrinsic rewards, as a cause even for our own behaviors. All right, so let's take a look at which maybe we should have done in the first place. Is our definition for intrinsic rewards. We can start with extrinsic. Guess we're not. Okay, extrinsic motivation is the desire to engage in an activity because of external rewards or pressures. Okay, and on the flip side, intrinsic motivation would be the desire to engage in activities because we enjoy it or find it interesting. So, what do you like to engage in? When you are engaging in an activity, do you like to engage in that activity because you might get something for it? Or do you prefer to engage in an activity because you find it interesting? Which activity are you going to be more likely to engage in? An activity that you find it interesting or an activity that you get a reward for? Well, some of you might say it depends on the reward. Of course, it depends on the reward, but let's look at natural rewards, right? Because nobody's sitting over there telling you, I'm going to make you a millionaire if you would do this. So the only rewards we really can guarantee on are sort of these natural rewards that we see in society or in general, right? Like the reward for doing well in class. What do we get? We don't get a candy bar. We don't get the teacher teaching us personally in our home for a week, right? We don't get a trophy for learning something. What do we get? We get, well, an A on the paper at the most, right? I got a tickle in my throat right now. We have 15 minutes. But really, we have to get the A on the paper, or we want to get the A on the paper so that we don't get in trouble. Extrinsic motivation, something outside of me, getting in trouble, right? Which might make that A worth more towards us, have a greater value. That A might have a greater value if we might get in trouble if we get a B or a C, right? But the value of that A really isn't much, really, on that paper. Next week, next month, next year, I'm not going to even remember that A on that paper, on that one assignment, on that spelling test, right? I'm not going to remember it. And it's going to have very little, it's going to have nothing to do with what motivates me next year, that A on that spelling test. So that A cannot be that important to me if it doesn't motivate me even a week later, right? So what is more important are how that A made me feel. Not that I got that A, but how did that A make me feel? It made me feel smart. And that is more motivating than the actual A. Intrinsic motivations are what we feel, the rewards or the punishments that we, guilt, anxiety, the rewards or the punishments that we feel inside. Think about the punishment. Isn't the punishment of anxiety sometimes worse than the actual punishment that we get of, getting our phone taken away or, not being able to go outside for a day? Sometimes the anxiety, not all the time, but sometimes the anxiety is worse than the punishment. Why? That's an intrinsic motivation, right? The depression that we have that lasts for years after an event sometimes can be worse than the event itself, right? The depression we feel. So we're saying what's more important for motivating us to be constructive or destructive? What we feel inside. That's what's most important. So the over justification effect says that we think it's more important, that we think the external stuff is more important, that we think the external things are really what motivates us. But if we think about it long and hard, we can see that simply isn't true. We're motivated to do crazy things for love, aren't we? We put ourselves in harm's way when we feel courageous or feel like helping, right? So those are all motivations that are internal. But often we come to believe that our motivations are not really internal, that are most important. How can that be? How can it be that I can tell you that the most important motivations are internal, but often we have the over-justification effect in that we think that more important are the external motivations? How can we get that so wrong? Think about that while I take a drink of my water and clear my throat. How can we get that so wrong? How can we be so driven and motivated by external forces when the fact is that internal forces are what motivates us more? How can we get that so wrong? This really is a newer phenomenon. It's a Western new phenomenon. Stop with stuff. So how can we get this so wrong? Well, the reason is because we have, and again, I said this is more recent, because we have so many external motivations that are right in front of our face. That's the reason why. We are constantly reminded of what we could lose because of terrorism, how we might be in harm's way because of homicide or homicidal maniacs. We're constantly reminded of the fear we should have because of these external forces. And we're constantly reminded of what we don't have. That nicer house down the road, that bigger car, the degree that we wanted to have, the job that we wanted to have. External things are where? In front of our eyes. They're in front of our faces. So we are biased to believe that external things really create internal feelings to be motivated. But that simply isn't true. And so you're like, well, why can't I be motivated by both? Why can't I be motivated by both? Because they're in direct competition with one another. Because if I go for the house and the car, I'm not feeding other important things. Because it takes time to get those things. It takes a career, it takes money, and then my focus is all on those things. Why do I think that external motivations are bigger motivators? Because they're in front of my eyeballs all the time. And I'm being reminded by society all the time. That's what's important. It's important that you are smarter than the next person. It's important that you dress nicer. It's important that you have more class than, we don't pay attention to class so much. That kind of class, right? It's important that you have this education. It's important that you went to U of M and not Michigan State. All of those things feed our external desires. But when I am on that road to seek and receive those external desires, those external rewards, I have no time to be working on something internal like real love, gratitude, appreciation for what I have. No, I need more. I need more. And that's our philosophical discussion that we have later on today. It's about disobedience, but it's about the idea of disobedience to the group who only has you wanting more. When we are talking about disobedience in our philosophical classroom, we're not talking about disobeying authority. We are talking about meeting our intrinsic motivations. We are talking about meeting our intrinsic desires. And in order to do that, we have to disobey the driving external forces that tell you, be more like me, buy what I have, say this, don't say that, be woke, be politically correct. We are spending, when we focus on external motivations, all of our time focusing on that. We have no time to perfect, to refine, to purify, to immortalize who we are and fulfill those kinds of real needs, basic needs, need for relatedness, need for feeling competence, and need for autonomy. All of those are intrinsic needs that we are fulfilling. Okay, let me see. I've got a few more minutes here, but I am running out of steam. I'm going to leave you with this, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, just a little bit about what this chart has, the elements on this chart, and then I'm going to call it a day, because like I said, I'm running out of steam here. So I'm talking to you about your ability to master a task. And what I'm taking a look at is an example. This is an example. And the example is, what is your view of intelligence? Okay? And I'm going to find something here while we're talking. And is your view of intelligence a view of intelligence that says intelligence is an innate DNA kind of a thing, that I either have it or I don't have it? And that is an entity perspective. If you feel that, I'll give you another example. You might feel that to be a great basketball player, and these are true. These things are true. I'm not saying these things are false, okay? You might feel that to be a good basketball player, that what you need to do is you need to have certain physical makeup, right? So part of my DNA, in order for me to be a good basketball player, it has to be part of my DNA. And part of my DNA needs to have things like I'm tall, right? Taller. And that I have, that I have coordination, hand-eye coordination. I can dribble a ball, right? Those things are physical requirements that you either have or you don't have. And that's the idea of entity. You either have the skill or you don't have the skill. And again, in this case, in this example that we are using, we're using the example of intelligence. A lot of people believe that intelligence is you either have it or you don't have it. That you're born with a certain capacity for intelligence, and then that's it. You can count on it or you don't, or you can't count on it, but you have that capacity or you don't. I'm looking up. I'm trying to find this. Survey And I'm not finding it, although I'll get it up there. So this is a survey that I'm looking for that actually would tell you whether or not you were more entity oriented or whether or not you were more I'm going to find it. Incremental oriented, whether you are oriented more towards entity I got it. Or whether you are more geared towards what we call incremental theorists. Okay, so I am going to right now take a picture of this and get it up there so that you can see. Now I'm going to give you this with the scores on it, and what you want to do is you want to not take a look at how you score this necessarily, okay? It's not a big deal if you see how you score it. It's not that big of a deal, but you don't necessarily want to take a look at how you score it in advance, okay? And just answer the questions as honestly as you can, okay? All right, so here is the survey that you can take to find out if you have a tendency to be more entity-oriented. Do you believe that that talents are fixed and you either have those talents or you don't have those talents? Is that what you believe? Or do you believe that you can change them and build on them as you learn? So I'm going to hide that other stuff and just take a look at the questions over here. So you're rating your answers on a scale of 1 to 6, with 1 being strongly agree and 6 being strongly disagree, and all the other ones somewhere in between. So there are questions like, the kind of person someone is something very basic and can't be changed very much. So to what extent do you believe that statement is true? Do we have the whole thing on there? Number 2, people can do things differently, but the important parts of who they are can't really be changed. So you can see that this theory or this survey really is measuring these concepts of what is changeable and what isn't changeable about a person, right? And your beliefs about that, your beliefs about what can change and what can't change. So there's a survey that you can take if you want to, and you can see whether you have a tendency to be more entity-oriented or incremental-oriented. And then we'll come back and we'll take a look at this chart and we'll see the differences in our ability to be able to master anything that we are challenged on. What is the likelihood that we can master a task? So we're motivated to accomplish a task. What is the likelihood that we can accomplish that task? That's what we will talk about when we come back on Tuesday. Remember, we are meeting here at, I don't even know what time, 11 o'clock now. We're meeting here at 11 o'clock now. And so that's all that I have for you today. Thanks for joining me if you did. I hope you got a lot out of this. This really is critical thinking. It's just taking all kinds of things, facts that we know, right? Knowledge that we know, and we are combining that with things that we're finding out, ways that we are investigating things, right? And changing our perspectives. So this critical thinking is taking a look at old ideas and new ideas and trying to teach you theoretically behaviors that you can implement that will really help you become more constructive. These are coping behaviors is what we're learning here in this critical thinking classroom. Thanks for joining me if you were joining me, and hopefully you'll take a look at these videos later on if you didn't. Thanks.